video, I am going to tell you all about my birth. Before I start, I want to say that I had a really amazing positive birth experience. So if you're someone who, like me, in your preparation, you're really just trying to welcome in all the positive stuff and not read too much or watch too much negativity around birth, then I would say stay tuned, because I'm not going to tell you any birth horror stories. Even though I had a really positive experience, my birth I didn't have a plan. I had preferences when it came to birth, but there was a little minor complication that we kind of sailed through pretty easily. So I think it's nice to know that you can have a really beautiful birth experience that doesn't necessarily follow the sequence that you expect it to, but it still was really amazing. So if you have been reading my blog or following my Instagram for a while, you know that I really prepared to have a beautiful, calm, natural birth. I did hypnobirthing online course with a Positive Birth company. I did lots of meditation, lots of kind of self-care, and lots of educating myself and reading and watching lots of positive birth stories as well in preparation for birth. So I do have a full blog post where I talk about how I prepared for my birth. So I'll make sure I link that under the video so that you can check it out in case you want to learn about how I prepared. So I got my first little inkling that I might be in labour on the morning of April the 2nd, which was Tuesday morning. And I woke up at I think it was about 3:34 a.m. and I felt like a little period kind of cramping, but it felt a little bit stronger than a period. And I felt, this is probably in my mind, but it felt like my cervix was starting to open. And I instantly in that moment, I went, this is it. I hadn't had a lot of you never know what it's going to be like going into labour. And I was like, am I going to know 24 hours before I go into labour, or is it just going to happen? So I hadn't had much indication that anything was going on, other than the day before I'd taken a photo of my belly and it looked a lot lower than it had to me. So to me, I thought, oh, I think the baby might have dropped. So, we might be in business soon. And when I went into labour, I was 39 weeks and 5 days pregnant. So I was 2 days shy of my due date, which was a pretty perfect time to go into labour, because I was kind of trying to mentally prepare myself to go over so that I didn't, get stressed about, I didn't want to get too fixated on my due date and go, oh, if I'm not in labour then, and then, it's talks of induction and that type of thing, different interventions start to come up. So I was very keen to keep it natural and really hoping to go into labour on my own. So I was really excited when I felt that 39 5 days. I was like, perfect. So I hopped out of bed and I knew that to get things I wanted to get things moving along a little bit, so I hopped onto our fit ball, the exercise ball, and I started doing some bouncing on that. So I was just hanging out in our lounge room in the dark by myself, bouncing away on the fit ball, because when you do that, the baby's head supposedly kind of presses down on the cervix, and so I thought that will help things get moving. So I did that for a little while. Then as the sun started to come up, or it started to get a little bit light outside, I took my fit ball onto our back deck, and my dog and my cat came with me, and I was just bouncing away out there, and I was having kind of regular, cramping. It wasn't anything I couldn't breathe through or talk through at this point. It was very kind of manageable, and I watched the sunrise, and I thought to myself, it's my baby's birthday today, and I was just so excited. I think all the preparation meant that when I felt like I was going into labour, instead of feeling scared or nervous, I only felt excitement. And I think as well, for me anyway, labour was such a immersive experience that I didn't get a chance to feel nervous about it at any point, which was really great. So I was just kind of doing my thing out in the backyard, and I had a TENS machine on hand. So a TENS machine sends little, you put electrodes on your back and it sends little pulses into your back that disrupt the pain signals that go from your uterus up to your brain. So it's a natural way of managing pain when you're in labour, because it's not drugs or anything that will affect you in that way, but it can just help you with pain management. So at about 6 a.m. I I went and woke up Trav and I said, can you pop the TENS machine on me now? Because I knew that it took about 45 minutes to an hour to actually start being effective. So I wanted to get in early, and I felt like my kind of cramping was actually already starting to get more intense each time, just a little bit more intense. And so we put the TENS machine on and I started using that. So what it does is it pulses away, just like little pulses. And when you have a contraction, you press the boost button and then it turns up a notch and it just comes out as a constant pulse. And that's meant to help manage the pain. So I was doing that, not in a lot of pain at this point, just kind of walking around the house. And I think at about 8 in the morning, I called my midwife, who I had an appointment with that day, and her name's Marion. And so I was, I'm booked in to give birth at the family birth centre, which is attached to a women's maternity hospital, but it's completely midwife run. So all the way through I'd been seeing Marion, my midwife, for appointments, and she'd been checking me, and my pregnancy had all been really smooth sailing. Baby had been healthy and well the whole time, so had I. And I just loved that the midwife run practice really aligned with my own desires for the type of birth I wanted. So they're really big on having a beautiful, natural, intervention-free birth. They're also really big on, post-birth having delayed cord clamping, where you allow all of the blood that's in the umbilical cord to empty into the baby, which is really important because up to 1/3 of their blood can be in the umbilical cord when they're born. So if you cut it straight away, they lose out on lots of nutrients and things like skin to skin as well. So having that beautiful skin to skin contact with bub as soon as they're born, and then helping to establish breastfeeding and all of that kind of thing. So when I wrote out my birth preferences, it was really everything, oh, there's the cat, everything that was really aligned with what the birth centre wanted for me. It was the same as what I wanted for myself. So that's really lovely to know that, where I was going was supporting what I wanted in my birth. So I called Marion and I said, look, I think I'm in labour. I'm having these regular kind of tightenings, and I feel like something's happening. I've lost a bit of mucus as well, so when you go into labour, you often have, you lose your mucus plug, or it's called your bloody show, where you just have a little bit of mucus that comes out that's been holding your cervix closed. So that had come out, and I'd seen that when I went to the loo, and so I told Marion, that's happened. She said, okay, but good to know. We won't bother with your appointment today, as this is your first baby. Don't get too excited. Just hang out, because this will probably take a while. Your baby will probably be here sometime tomorrow. This might even be something that just dies off and it doesn't turn into labour. So just chill for a bit, basically. So I was like, okay, we'll just do that. And I continued to have contractions at home. And at this point, probably about 8:30, 9 a.m, I was getting to the point where I really had to breathe through the contractions. So in the hypnobirthing course we'd done, you learn what's called up breathing, where you breathe in for 4 and then out for 8 counts. So I was using that to kind of breathe through the contractions, and they were in varying length from sort of 30 seconds to 60 seconds at this stage, and happening probably, 2 in 10 minutes kind of thing. So they say after you've had 3 60-second contractions in a 10-minute window over 2 hours, then you go into the birth centre, because that's when things are really underway. So I was timing them using an app, and that was all kind of ticking along. Then I went to the loo again, probably at about 9:30, 9ish, and I noticed there was quite a lot of blood this time. It's still lots of mucus and lots of blood, and I thought this is different to what I've seen before. When they showed us what to expect when our mucus plug came out in the birth class, it almost looked like, sorry to be gross, but like a loogie in a tissue. Didn't look like anything big, whereas I had quite a lot of mucus and quite a lot of blood. So I called my midwife again and said, look, this is, I don't know what's normal here. And so I sent her a couple of pictures, and she said, look, it's probably more blood than we would expect. So what I'm going to get you to do is come in so I can check you and make sure that everything's okay, and we'll just have a listen to baby's heartbeat and make sure that things are all going fine. So meet me at the birth centre at 10:30 is what she said to us. And my contractions were starting to get more and more intense. I was, having to lean over standing up and lean over like a tall bench, like our kitchen bench or a bench in the laundry, while I was having each contraction, and really focused just on my breath and breathing through that. So they were getting more intense, a little bit more painful. And I said to Trav, you know what, I don't want to wait till 10:30, let's just go. So we grabbed all our stuff. I had my bags packed. So I had one bag packed that was for labour and one bag that's packed just in case I had to have a hospital stay. Because at the birth centre you go home as between 4 to 6 hours after birth if everything goes to plan. So I had my 2 bags, we put everything in the car and headed over to the birth centre. I'm hearing lots of birth stories, people saying the car trip was agony, the car trip was horrible. The car trip was fine. Maybe because I went in a bit earlier than a lot of people would, but I had 2 contractions I think on the way. It's about a 15-minute drive, and just breathed through those and that was okay. So it wasn't horrible. I know several of my friends have thrown up on their way to the hospital or birth centre in the car, so I had a bucket handy. I didn't vomit myself, but I thought that's a valuable tip in case you are going to give birth soon, so take something that you can throw up in. We arrived at the birth centre, and because we were half an hour early, they didn't have a room for us yet. So I was having contractions all over the birth centre while they found a room for us. So I was leaning on the front desk, and then I was leaning on a desk around the corner, and people were steering their children away from me. And I was, hoping not to scare any pregnant ladies who were in the birth centre. But I wasn't having super intense contractions at the moment. I could still breathe through them, but I had to be leaning over. I couldn't just stand up. I had to be leaning on something. So eventually found a little consulting room for us to go into, and we had a chat with Marion, and she said, we listened to baby's heartbeat, that was all fine, so nothing to worry about. And she sort of said, look, it's still probably very early days, so why don't you go for a walk in the park, or if you want, we can set up the room here. And Trav and I kind of looked at each other, and we were like, yeah, I think we want the room here. Because I while we were in that little consulting room, I got to the point where I couldn't just breathe through contractions. I had to make noise with it. So I was breathing in and then sort of going like that on the way out. So I couldn't stay completely silent. I definitely couldn't talk through them at this point. In my mind, I was going, am I being a real baby about this? And is it going to be so much more intense and happen in 24 hours time or later, and I'm just getting like I'm struggling already because it's the early stages, or is this going a lot more quickly than anyone's realizing? So it turned out to be the second one. So we were in that room for a little while, and they set up a birth room, so we headed into that. So at this point it's about 11 a.m. So from those very first little crampings, I had kind of gone into active labour by about 10 a.m. So I'd had gentle crampings that were easy to deal with. By about 10 a.m. I was in what they call active labour, which just means that your body's actually starting, there's real proper contractions happening. It's not just your cervix opening. So I was in active labour. We didn't necessarily know that at this point. So it's about 11 a.m. We head into the birth room, and I was standing up next to the bed, leaning over with my hands on it and breathing through the contractions, still making that noise on the way out. And then I had, after about half an hour or so, I had a really strong urge to lie down. So I kind of, very unelegantly at this point, all I'm wearing is a singlet top, flopped onto the bed, lay on my side, and I had 2 contractions lying on my side in the bed. At this point now, Marion's taken over timing my contractions, and I was definitely having those 3 60-second contractions at least within a 10-minute span. So I had 2 contractions on the bed. Then I decided, I need to be standing up again. It's really amazing what your body tells you. Like, at no point did I have to think like, oh, where will I be most comfortable? What should I do? It was just like my body was like, I need to be standing, I need to be leaning over, I need to lie down now, I need to get up now. So I stood back up. My next contraction, my waters broke. And this is when we had a minor kind of complication in my birth, which was the fact that there was meconium in my waters. So meconium is baby's very first poo, and our little Lockie couldn't wait to do number 2s, and he had done them before. He'd he'd been born. And what that can mean is that because babies in utero, they breathe in the amniotic fluid and they breathe it out, the meconium can be irritating for their lungs. So it can it's not great to have them in there for a long time with the meconium. When they do that as well, it can also be a sign of distress. So it could be a sign that his heart rate's too low, or it could be a sign that he has an infection of some sort, or there's just something going on with the baby that has mean he's a little bit stressed out, so he's pooped before he's come out. So when that happens, that's one of the reasons that they transfer you up to the hospital. So Marion, our amazing midwife, said to me very calmly, okay, so there's meconium in your waters, so we just have to transfer you over to the hospital now because you'll need to stay and be monitored for about 12 hours after the birth. And I didn't feel at all bothered by this. I didn't feel at all worried. I think I was very much starting to get in the zone with my labour anyway. So I sort of went, yep, that's fine, we'll do that. And she said, before we transfer, just lie in the bed and I'm going to check you and see how dilated you are. So this is the first time in the whole process that I would be checked. And she had a look and said, you're fully dilated. And I think even she was a little bit surprised by that because it's my first labour and it was progressing really quickly. And so what we now know is the reason that I had quite a bit of blood and mucus at the beginning is just because my cervix was opening really, really fast. Normally it takes hours and hours and hours, and they sort of check you and you're 4 centimetres and then 5 centimetres and 6 centimetres. And so mine just decided it was going to open wide up. Which I was really happy about because I think that can be a real mental game. And I know when she was checking, I was just trying to like prepare myself, you know, if it's only a few centimeters, that's okay. When she looked at me and went, you're fully dilated, like it's almost go time, I was like, thank goodness, this is great. So she said, do you want a wheelchair or do you want to go in a bed up to the hospital? And I said, can I go in a bed on all fours? They said, yes, that's fine. So I hopped up into a bed, they put a sheet over me. This young guy had to wheel me up through the tunnels up to the hospital, and I think he was just a little bit stunned by the whole thing because by this point my contractions were a lot stronger and I was kind of mooing, just making animal sounds. I would make them for you, but I think they're only sounds I can make in labour with that out breath. So instead of that, it was really like very farmyard animal sounds, which is one of the things they say happens right before you need to start pushing. So I was definitely in that zone, and I remember as we were kind of being wheeled up to the hospital, there was people, you know, you going through the tunnels who were standing up against the side trying to stay out of the way of this mooing cow coming through in labour. So that was quite funny, but I honestly, you know, did not have a care in the world. Obviously I was much more focused on what was happening in my body and just breathing through those contractions. I think I had my head buried in the pillows and didn't want to look at what was going around. So, you know, it took a minute or two to get up to the birth suite in the hospital. So we arrived in there and I had a few more contractions on all fours on the bed, and then hopped off the bed and stood next to it and leaned over the bed. And it was actually a better height for me than what had been in the birth centre because the bed in the hospital was a bit higher. So I was standing, leaning over. Basically that was the position I was in my whole labour. Like when I was, same as when I was leaning on the kitchen bench, I wanted to be standing with my hands leaning on something. And then Marion, I also, when I stood up in the birth suite, I got the shakes really bad and I was a bit worried. I was like, what's happening right now? And Marion said, don't worry, you're having a big surge of adrenaline because it's almost time to push. So don't worry, that's okay, the shakiness is fine. So it was just amazing having her reassurance there, and she was really good at kind of coaching me, especially through the next part, which got a lot more intense. And she said, well, because we're nearly ready to go, because you're fully dilated, let's try doing some nice deep squats and see if we can really get the baby to drop. And I was sort of, you know, very ready to get the baby out at this point, so happy to try anything. She said, we'll just do 2. Because I had that adrenaline, I couldn't like lift myself out of a squat. My legs were shaking so much. So Trav had to stand behind me. And when I was down in this deep squat, he had to be in deep squat too, holding me, my whole pregnant weight. And then he had to lift me out. I'd sort of finish a contraction and be like, up, and he would have to lift me out of this squat, and then I could lean back on the bed until the next contraction, and then I'd go down into a squat again. So I probably did I don't know, I don't even know, maybe 8 or 10 squats in the end, because I was just like, you know, if this is going to get the baby down, I'm going to do it. And it's also nice to have something to do during a contraction. I still had the TENS machine. I actually don't know how much it helped because I had it on the whole labour. So I never laboured without the TENS machine on. I definitely forgot to press the button a lot of times, whether to turn off the boost or turn on the boost, because I just was distracted. But yeah, so Trav was helping me in and out of those squats, and it was good to have that to do to kind of focus my energy on during the contraction, because it's starting to get a lot more intense, a bit more painful now. So we did those, and then Marion said, all right, let's just come back to standing now and see what's happening. And so at this point, it was now time for me to push. So she said, yep, the baby's low enough, we're going to start pushing. And I definitely had that urge to push as well that they talk about. So I was really ready for that. And the pushing was by far like the most intense thing I have done in my whole life, pushing that baby out. It's so hard to describe. It's so primal. It just felt like it was me and my body, and we were just, you know, there was nothing outside of my body that existed almost. It was really, really, really intense. So I'm feeling these contractions. Marion's helping me to push. I'd asked her in my birth preferences to give me some direction when it came to pushing, even though in hypnobirthing in the course we'd done, they'd said sort of, you know, don't be coached to push. Just breathe the baby out. I just had this sense that I wanted that support. I didn't want my midwife standing there knowing that she could say something that might help me and not saying anything because I'd written something in my birth preferences. And what do I know? I've never given birth before. So it was great having her direction then of how to push. And so it was sort of like I'd take in this quick of air, because I found that pain was really, really, really intense when I was breathing in. So I'd take a quick kind of suck in of air, and then I'd just push as hard as I could. And I was so determined, you know, to get him out. And I thought the more I push, the quicker I can get him out, and then I'm done. But so I'd suck in the air, I'd push, and I had a couple of things in my mind as well. My mum had told me that giving birth feels like pooing out of watermelon, which is actually really helpful, because I know some of my girlfriends had said to me, you actually feel like you're pushing more out your bum than you feel like you're pushing them out your vagina. So I had that in my mind, that I was trying to poo out a watermelon. I also had a friend of mine who'd given birth about 10 days before, had said a midwife had been telling her to push and hold, and then another midwife came in and said push and push through, like see if you can keep pushing through that push, and that had been much more helpful than the push and hold direction. So you kind of push and you can feel the baby coming down, and I didn't want him to keep going up, because they kind of do that, like the head comes down and then you stop pushing and it goes up a bit, and then it comes down a bit more and it goes up a bit, and you can feel this. It's just like a lot of pressure, it feels like, as you can imagine. It's a lot of pressure down there. So I was pushing, and I you know, no drugs, no nothing, just my TENS machine, which I'd probably completely forgotten about at this point. So I was pushing and holding and pushing through the push and thinking about pooing out a watermelon and all those things. And usually at the end of the contraction, when I'd been pushing, I'd come out of it and I'd almost like, that was when I'd lose my nerve a little bit, and I'd say something like I can't, or I'd just be like hyperventilating, or like no I can't do it, because it's so indescribably intense. So that's when Trav and Marion were amazing. Trav was giving me water between every contraction, which was great, and just, you know, helping me to breathe. And Marion was reminding me, you know, go deep within, take a breath, reset, let it go, loosen your shoulders, like all of these little tips. And I think I was just so lucky that she was the one who was there with me while I was in labour, because even though you see a midwife throughout your pregnancy, there's no guarantees that they'll be working the day that you go into labour. There's no guarantees they haven't just been up all night delivering someone else's baby. So I was so grateful that she was there, because she knew me and she knew all the prep that I'd been doing so she could really speak my language, and she could really speak to me and remind me of all of the skills that I'd collected in my prep, and remind me when to use those when I was in that really intense pushing phase. So she was telling me, you know, baby's coming around the corner, nearly here, like all of that positive reinforcement as well. And so then I felt the baby's head was right very close, and that is insanely intense. And then it took me an hour and a half of pushing altogether to get him out. So my second last contraction, he'd got his head out, which was like the most amazing relief in the world, knowing that the biggest part is out, but also feeling that the biggest part is out. And then the following contraction, I pushed out his shoulders and the rest of his body, and Trav caught him, and he passed him up to me through my legs, and I was kind of shaking and exhausted, or not exhausted, but just, yeah, tired from all of that pushing. And my hands had pretty much gone numb because I'd still been standing up leaning on the bed. I'd delivered with my one foot up on a chair. My right foot was up on a chair. So he caught the baby, they passed him up. I was like, I'm going to drop him. My hands are numb, but I just clutched onto him and kind of, you know, sank onto the bed that I'd been leaning on all that time, and he was there, and he was on my chest, and I can't even remember what I said to him, but I know I told him that I'm his mum and that it's okay and that we're here, and that I love him as well. So that was literally the most magical moment ever, to meet him and hold him for the first time. And we got to have beautiful 4 hours of skin to skin after he was born, even though I think a doctor wanted to take him off me. I wasn't aware of this at the time, but a doctor wanted to cut the cord and take him away for monitoring because of the meconium straight away. And I think Marion just marched her out of the room and said, no, give us a minute. We're just gonna, you know, see if he pinks up and if he's okay. And he went pink very quickly. As when they come out, babies are often grey or purple or blue, which I knew because I'd watched lots of birth videos. But yeah, if you haven't watched those, you wouldn't know that. And it can be a bit scary to see a little blue or purple baby. So Lockie was pretty purple when he came out. But he pinked up nice and quickly, and I just went back, lay on the bed, and he had a little cry on my chest. And then after about 20 minutes or so, he had his first breastfeed. He knew exactly what he was doing. So that was just, yeah, an amazing kind of end to the birth. So even though I ended up being transferred to the hospital, which wasn't part of my preferences, all of my kind of desires were really advocated for because I had Trav there and because I had Marion there. So there were no extra people in the room. Apparently there were quite a few doctors who wanted to come in and you know, see the birth in action. But they were all kind of sent away because one of the things I'd said is I want as few people in the room as possible. I don't want, you know, I don't want all these extra people watching me give birth. And so we just had this beautiful skin to skin time. I also, in my preferences, I wanted to see if I would pass the placenta naturally. So they call it a physiological third stage, fourth stage, I can't even remember now. And so that's when your body just expels your placenta naturally. Or you get a shot of kind of synthetic oxytocin, which will cause your uterus to contract and help the placenta come out itself. So an hour went by, which is kind of the maximum amount of time that you get to pass your placenta, and mine hadn't come out. So Marion said, all right, let's go get you on the toilet and see if you can push it out there. And so at this point I was covered in poop because the baby had pooped again all over my stomach. There was blood, I was naked, I was breastfeeding, and I kind of hobbled over to the toilet and sat there and tried to push it out and literally could feel nothing down there. I was like, I don't think I'm pushing anything. Who knows what's happening? I just can't feel anything. That area is just done pushing for now. So I had the shot of synthetic oxytocin, and then Marion got my placenta out really easily, and we packed it up because I got it encapsulated. So we packed that up and let the lady know that it was ready to be picked up. So but I was totally fine with that at that point. I was sort of like, you know what, I don't even care, give me the shot, let's get this out. You know, there's nothing I could have done to push it out at that point. So I hopped back into bed and kept having my skin to skin after that. And then So I had a mild 2nd degree tear from my labour, which has healed up really well since. And so that had to be sutured up. So after about 4 hours of skin to skin with baby, and I'd had some food, which was like, you know, crappy hospital sandwiches and cold toast, tasted like the most delicious meal of my life. They brought in a big tray of food for Trav and I ate the whole thing. So I gave birth at about 3 p.m, 2:59 was when Lockie was born. So all in all, I was really only in active labour for about 5 hours, from about 10 a.m. to 3 p.m, which is very, very quick for a first labour. And Marion said to only have a mild 2nd degree tear after that quicker first labour, you should be very stoked, because it's, I think often you can tear a little bit more than that if you have such a quick labour. So to get sutured up, she said, have some of the gas and air, which is something that you can have while you're in labour as well. So I have some of the gas and air, and just, to kind of take the edge off so that I didn't get stressed about it. Then they do a local anaesthetic before they sew you up down there. So I started sucking on the gas and air. At this point, I'd given Bub to Trav. He had him on his chest. He was sitting next to me. And I started sucking on the gas and air, and you know what? I had the time of my life on that stuff. I am obviously not a party animal in any way, but I was really sucking on it, and I started to feel really kind of drunk, like that feeling where you're in a nightclub and you're in the toilets and you can just hear that throbbing of the music and the world's spinning a little bit. I've honestly felt like I was in a nightclub. At one point I turned to Trav and I said, I can't believe you just put on the song that's in my head, because the rattle of breathing in the gas, there's kind of like a little ball that just tells you that you're breathing it in properly that rattles, and that had somehow in my mind turned into a Basement Jaxx song. So, and then I thought Trav had put the song on, and he just looked at me like, and I was like, oh, there's no music playing, is there? So I had a little bit of fun on the gas and air, and once Marion was finished stitching me up, they took that off me, which was quite difficult because I didn't want to give it up. So eventually they managed to take the gas and air off me. I started to sober up a little bit. They convinced me to hop in the shower, which I told them I didn't want to do while I was still high as a kite on the gas and air. And eventually, they convinced me to have a shower. So I went and hopped in the shower and cleaned up, and then came back and we'd wrapped up the baby, and I was wheeled off to the labour ward where we were going to be monitored. So all in all, it was just the most incredible experience of my life, and I would do it again in a heartbeat. I don't regret at all anything that happened. I feel so grateful that it progressed so quickly, because I think it just meant I didn't have a chance to overthink or get nervous or for it to stop. You know, at no point did it stall. My labour just went go, go, go. And I was open to the idea of a water birth. It wasn't something I was, completely set on. Didn't even have a chance to run a bath. I had brought in with me, fairy lights and essential oils and nice things to labour with in the birth centre. Didn't touch a single one of them. I'm sure you would if you had a longer labour. And I definitely would have. Same with like the snacks and things that we bought. But it was too quick. I didn't have time to do any of that basically. And in the end, it turned out to be so lucky that I had gone into the birth centre early, because otherwise I would have hit that really active labour at home, and then probably the car ride would have been excruciating, or who knows, I might have ended up delivering at home or in the car, or having my waters break and having that meconium in the waters when I wasn't at the birth centre already. So I'm so glad that we had that, that I had that extra bleed at the beginning that meant that I had to go in so that I was already where I wanted to be to give birth. And since then, Lockie's been amazing. It's been, such an incredible experience. But I think I'll make another video or a blog post or something about my experience with motherhood. And he's 3 weeks old and 2 days today as I record this. So I'm still very new to it. We're still learning a lot. I think Trav and I learn so much every day about him and how to read him and how to be better parents to him. So it's been amazing so far. But yeah, that's my birth story in a nutshell. And if you are someone who's afraid to give birth, just go in there all guns blazing and it's going to be amazing. Trust your body. Like, I have a whole new respect for my body and what it can do, and the depth that I could go to with my own body were just really, really empowering and really incredible. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed watching, and I'll catch you again soon.